Evet, hoş geldiniz Selva ve Gregers Tang Thomsen. Ee, Biz bugün her zamankinden farklı bir formatta götüreceğiz söyleşimizi. Yarı İngilizce, yarı Türkçe. Belki gidişata göre biri çok, biri az olabilir ama çünkü bu ikiliden bir tanesi Türkçe aslında konuşuyorsun ama belki bu şeye katılacak kadar değil ya da İngilizceyi tercih edebilirsin. So I'll shift to English time to time for guaranteeing your contribution to the conversation. I think you are already familiar with what we are doing in this Kalebodur'la Mimarlarla Konuşuyor series. We are trying to talk with some of the architects, architectural critics, academicians, and trying to obtain a general image of what's happening in the field of contemporary Turkish architecture. And it will turn into a kind of a collection, a DVD collection probably. Plus, maybe we are going to publish some of it. I don't know. The project is a sustainable one. At least I hope it like that. And today we are with a very unique group because of many reasons, actually. One of them was, as we were talking, you haven't built anything yet. Am I right?
It's not true.
I mean, I may be exaggerating, but that is a very significant point because till now we have been with Emre, Han, I mean, not Nevzat yet, but Gökhan, and we couldn't know which building to talk about because there were lots of built examples. So one of the significant features of this conversation is that. Am I right, Selva?
Yani evet 7 senelik pratiğe göre 2 tane bina var. Biriyle ev sahibi müşteriyle kavgalık olduğumuz için pek fazla bahsetmiyoruz. Bir tanesi
belki
proje.
o nedenle webde de görmedim ben, öyle mi?
Yok, evet. İşte ondan sonra yani konsept aşamaları var da bitmiş hali yok. Bir tane Danimarka'da şimdi bitmek üzere olan bir beton var, pavyon var. O sürekli olarak kalacak ama
onu gördüm galiba. Evet.
bu Taylor Creed projesinin son ürünü olarak bir tane bir şey var. Bir de
şöyle
bir
gelip,
satış ofisi var ama
da
sonra proje iptal olduğu için satış ofisinde bir anlamı kalmadı. Böyle evet inşa edilmiş.
But are there projects on the table?
For building? Yes, actually. We will have this one apartment building. This kind of a story. Ben de şimdi böyle İngilizceden Türkçe'ye geçerken çok karmakarışık olmaz umarım. Benim ailemin ev sahibi olduğu bir binada binanın tekrar yıkılıp yapılması söz konusu oldu. Onun mimarisini üstlendik. Komşular inşallah bizi işten atmazsa onu yapacağız.
Evet. Maybe the other reason that makes you unique is the formation of the group. Gregers is coming from, as far as I know, Netherlands or Aarhus, Denmark.
Yes.
You have studied in Aarhus.
Yes, I'm studying in Aarhus.
Yeah, which is actually an architectural school I like very much. I've been there twice. And you have been worked in Netherlands together, as far as I know, and you have been in States for a while. Then you decided to come to Turkey together. Now you are practicing here, so you are representing many cultures, many geographies at a time, and that's called Superpool. What does Superpool means?
Superpool for us is a name that tries to reflect that architecture is not one man's work, in our opinion. Basically, you need to pool a lot of resources together to
integrated design, collaboration.
Yeah, and we also enjoy that a lot. I mean, for us, that's the way where we get to work with the most interesting people, because on project basis, we invite the people that let's say can contribute and complement us the best. So it's a way of for us to get the best out of any given situation in some ways.
I think that characteristics coming from outside also gives a chance, besides many difficulties, I'm sure, gives a chance to look from the outside. So it gains a kind of a critical distance to whatever happening here. How do you see the Turkish context? I mean, of course, there may be time-wise differences when you first interacted and now, but in general, as a foreign architect, let me say, you are not foreign anymore. How do they call him? Like damat or enişte?
Yeah, or
like
still
that.
yabancı. But every day on the ferry, yeah. No, but I think, obviously, actually when we arrived to Istanbul, Selva had been away for 7 years, studying and working abroad. And she had this foreigner with her coming back to Istanbul. So in some ways we had to rediscover the city together, because 7 years being away from Istanbul is a lifetime somewhere else. So of course that...
But you were familiar with Istanbul. You are originally from Istanbul.
Evet, ben İstanbulluyum ama yani lise çağını ve yani çocukluğunu ve lise çağını İstanbul'da geçirmiş biriyim. Hani üniversiteye de İstanbul Teknik'te başladım burada ama burada bitirmedim. Los Angeles'ta bitirdim. Biz bunu hep şey olarak düşünüyorum. Yani burada çocukluğunu yaşamakla gelip bir mimar olarak şehir üzerine bir şey söylemeye çalışmak birbirinden çok farklı şeyler. Yani ben de sıfırdan başladım bir yerde. Ve biz bu sıfırdan başlamayı nedense hep tuttuk. Yani 7 senedir hala sıfırdan başlıyormuş gibi hissediyoruz bazı konularda. Çünkü öyle bir merakla şehre yaklaşmak iyi geliyor. Yani sürekli bilmediğin şeyleri fark edip işte bunu da öğrenelim, şu da ne, bak hani ilk yaptığımız işlerden biriydi bu dolmuş minibüs haritası ve tamamen hani mesela meraktan ve bir kendimize ve Gregers'a şehri anlatmaya çalışma ihtiyacından doğmuştu.
Ama sonra o bir böyle daha büyük ve ciddi bir projeye dönüşmüş.
Dönüştü, evet.
Mapping İstanbul.
Evet.
Arada bir bike map
var.
Şeyi var, haritası var falan.
Haritası
Bunların
var.
hepsi tabii İstanbul'u anlamaya yönelik şeyler.
Evet.
Bu Mapping İstanbul'u biraz daha detaylı konuşmak istiyorum ama before that, after mapping all different sides of Istanbul, how do you see Istanbul?
Burada biz hep, what should I do it in Turkish or English? Maybe I do it in English so Gregers can also contribute to this. It's a kind of critical conversation. What we see in Istanbul is, I think we are sort of tired of the cliches about Istanbul. So part of the mapping projects were also meant to tackle that. Like Istanbul, does it have a public transport system? I guess it does, because when you actually look at how many bus lines there is actually a lot of bus lines. But some of these things don't get communicated well, and some of these things actually don't get the, in some ways, the attention and if the care that they deserve. And what happens with us a lot is we end up having to have a lot of European guests. So there's a lot of outsiders, like serious outsiders, who come and ask us, so what's wrong with your city? And why does this not work? Why does that not work? So we slowly, from having to answer to them, we have, I think, learned things that are uniquely working in Istanbul and things that are uniquely, of course, not working. But we try to focus on the things that are actually in the positive direction somehow. So that's why we always talk about the dolmuş system or the minibus system or sort of these strange things that the city has invented. Could we actually talk about them? Could we actually turn them into something that is even better than the existing system? So we have this sort of strange role of both having to speak for the city, having to observe it and kind of make comments on it, and then also having to deal with a lot of the cliches of outsiders. So it's kind of strange position.
I mean, and I guess the kind of the interest comes from like working. We didn't touch that, but working at OMA for 4 years, basically before starting any project, you do an intense amount of research to understand that particular location where you need to design whatever it may be. And in this case, the project was Istanbul, right? So we tried to to not have any preconceptions of what Istanbul is, and really from scratch create an understanding what the city is from our point of view.
And it's of course, it's not a clean picture either. It has pieces and parts, and we know a little bit here and a little bit there. But it's also, you realize that it's also a city that's very difficult to make very big statements about. You cannot.
We don't claim that we know Istanbul, but we know parts of it.
And we're learning it.
Yes.
We have a desire to learn it.
And there is a physical city on one hand, but also a culture overlapping to it, which makes everything more complicated and even more difficult to understand, maybe because the cultural diversity is very significant and different. So I see all these mapping analysis. I usually use this methodology of mapping in my architectural criticism classes for many different problematic areas to build a let's say background, a contextual background, which can be later on added to all the projects and or making a basis for the projects. What do you see in terms of these cultural diversities? Can you see significant continuities between the city and the cultural diversity?
Do you want to take that? Okay, I can start.
Yeah, let's start.
I think
I'm asking this in a very conscious way because this will follow with another question.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a strong believer of like that. The city is the embodiment of culture, so you can't really separate them. It's a thousand or million little decisions that actually make the city, and the million little decisions come from the million people, and it's sort of a reflection. So if you see a city that looks very haphazard, most likely its rules and conduct is haphazard. If you see a city very orderly, it probably has rules. People have among themselves certain rules and boundaries and whatnot. So I think there is always, for me, a direct relationship between how people are and what kind of city they build. Does that answer?
Yes, but I mean, when I look at all the recent production, contemporary architecture, especially in Istanbul, I see a kind of a continuity, either artificial or not, with the international architecture, or let me say, mainstream architecture, whatever existing. Even in your projects, for example.
Sure, of course. I mean,
when we look at what you have done with BIG as a proposal to a housing block in Istanbul, I don't feel any cultural or contextual feedback. It seems, I mean, if you had been written underneath it, I mean, it's a collaborated project by BIG and Superpool in Amsterdam, I wouldn't be so critical about it, maybe.
Sure.
So how do you explain that? After mapping everything, after trying to understand the city, all these cultural diversities, how does it reflect back to architecture?
That's fair
or
enough.
Should it reflect back to architecture?
No,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it should reflect back on architecture. I think it's our general opinion, but I don't think we do not see it as a stylistic, let's say, result. I think when we looked at that site that Suryapo had acquired, what was, let's say, the most important for us.
Namely, it is a Suryapo project. For the followers, I mean, maybe they would like to see the images of the project.
I think the dominating feature of that site was that was one of the few leftover green areas in Umrania. Right, it's an enormous site, 60,000 square meter, plain green, no building on that site. So I think the proposal there was to protect it, which means we instead of piercing it with towers, we built let's say a structure of buildings around the site. And of course, it actually goes against the building culture in that zone, because the culture of building in that particular area was to build individual towers. So in some ways you could say it's a counter proposal to the culture of building in that area. Because we saw there was a lack of public green space or green spaces in that area. So we were trying to make a counter argument for a different way of building in that area. But of course it didn't have any stylistic, let's say, recognizable elements from Turkish culture, like Unina Selçuk or.
But I mean, then you come into sort of a taboo conversation, right? How do you define aesthetics and how?
That's true, and
yeah.
if you are not reducing it into a stylistic manner,
Right.
if you are omitting anything concerning, or it's not just style, let me say. So how do you explain, for example, the Konya experience? Because the courtyard is, on one hand, is a very Turkish idea, introverted building, a kind of a mass, and it's a very good, I think, commentary on the courtyard architecture on one hand. On the other hand, there's a very stylistic motifs that is shaping the whole form and the plan of the structure.
I mean, in some ways, I guess we're young and testing. So this is, I think, one part of the thing, the whole discussion. And I think it's a healthy thing to keep testing forms and ideas. And yes, of course, the diagram is as important, like the courtyard diagram, or in Suryapo, the sort of the perimeter block diagram. And they come from very, in our opinion, kind of thoughtful looking at the context of the city and kind of trying to make something good for the city, not only for the building, because that's somehow what we see as a challenge in Istanbul. Yes, the buildings, how they touch the ground, what they do with their environment is always a secondary thing. It never becomes sort of the first concern. Everyone has a boundary of their site, and that's their boundary. They don't look beyond. It's difficult to look beyond because of legislation and as well, so there's excuses why. But that's also the tendency. So we usually try to come up with an urban argument to create the diagram, and then of course you have to come up with an idea of how that building looks. And this, I think, it's fair, I think, to experiment there. And I think it's the only way to reach an authentic result is by experimenting and trying something that hasn't been done. And partly that's also why we don't end up building much, because the buildings we propose don't look familiar, and then the clients don't choose them.
Isn't it a kind of a general contradiction in Turkish architectural medium that they always come and ask for a unique building and a kind of a competitive architectural experience, let me say, but if you end up with a really different thing, then they hesitate to realize it and they want to turn back to. I usually witness this in many cases. I mean, is it the case that you are also?
Yes, but I guess that's kind of a normal human reaction, I would say. I think maybe we don't like change, and especially when it comes to issues like architecture, which are supposed to stay there for a long time. Many people become conservative on the issue, and for us, it just only is interesting to experiment and to try new materials, to try new techniques. We hope one day we will be able to build stuff like that, and in that sense, to be a part of the Vakko project was kind of exciting for us also, because that facade was a very innovative facade, and to see that it could happen was a relief. But if hopefully it will also kind of occur in our practice as well.
Yeah, but so again, what was unique with it's not our design. It was designed by REX out of New York, but we were involved in contacting contractors and engineers and so forth. But it also takes courage from the client side, right? As you said, though, most client will still ask for the best project in the world.
But they also have the reservation for it.
Yes, yes. And I think for Vaco, it was extremely important that this project really became a signature for their brand.
I don't know how many other projects one can count like that, where something is pushed to its limit. Yeah.
But when you talk about technology and material as the essence of this innovative or research-based architecture, I think this Taylor-Creed project is very significant and important.
Yes.
It's is it a European project initiated by the?
It's a collaborative project. The funding comes from European Commission. It's under the FP7 projects. The essence was to look into robotics and how they could be, or how the concrete industry could be kind of revolutionized with automation. And it has 14 partners. It's lasted 4 years. It's just finishing now. And the idea was to look in different pieces of the concrete industry, so from formwork to the actual concrete mix, the self-compacting concrete, to the reinforcement that goes inside, to the design tools and so forth, and create a sort of to take each part of the technology one step further. Maybe you can talk about what was accomplished.
It was very interesting because it's one of the areas that Turkey can be really innovative in such an industry. We are very good and experienced on producing reinforced concrete, and there are lots of possibilities, etc. So, but I mean, when you look at the traditional modes of production, it is very repetitive, and there are not much innovative challenges. So, I mean, anything that contributes to this field will be very valuable, I think. I hope the results are showing something.
Yeah, I mean, we will, here in the summer, or in the early spring, we will be finished with the prototype building that was built to demonstrate all the, let's say, possibilities and new innovations. Of course, within the European context, where labor cost is very expensive, the use of automation is the only way in order to be able to build, let's say, more complex geometries in concrete. In Turkey, we still have, and it goes back to our interest in materials and production, is that we still have a mix of craftsmanship and also high-end technologies, where we see in Europe. Most of the manufacturing capacity is slowly disappearing, right? It's moved to Far East or even to Turkey, right? But what Turkey has at the moment is quite unique, that there is still capacity for production.
And increasing.
Increasing, but also it's still not outsourced, and Vaco is a core example of that.
And to go back to the issue of style and kind of this innovation technology material research, this has been sort of a part of also the education at our home office, OMA, basically, that the argument for, or kind of the way to argue for aesthetics has always been somehow related to an innovation or a technique or a way of using a material in an unexpected way. So it becomes an interesting challenge to carry on in life as a designer. Like how,
of course, culture on the other hand.
Yes.
Technology and innovation on one hand, but the culture that will appreciate and accept it. So
sure.
It's a kind of sometimes a kind of accelerating effect on,
sure.
Or sometimes it's a kind of a obstacle or boundary.
Sure, that is true. But we think that this is still worth trying, though. While we are, when we have still a small office and our costs are not so high that we can still afford to be experimental, it's important, I think, to keep that. And of course, after a point, the bigger the office, then some things become more difficult.
Isn't it contradictory? I mean, I was always thinking that when your office is bigger and you have lots of opportunities, bigger, let's say, better clients, etc., you have a chance to experiment more, and you can maybe reserve a budget for innovation and research. But it doesn't happen usually.
No, I guess it's
most of the small and young offices in Turkey are innovative and research-based, whereas the big offices doesn't.
I think there's two ways. I think there's two ways to answer this. One is the kind of the general context where we don't tie it to Turkey. I think you have to cultivate this when you're younger. So if you hopefully if you have it, you can kind of continue it. But it's probably more difficult to get into it afterwards, maybe. But I always think in Turkey, like the generation before us of Emre Oralat and Hantu Mertekin, and they had another duty, I think.
They became the older generation. They are my generation. Be careful.
Sorry, it's okay. We're also turning.
We are the older generation now.
We're not that young either, but not so far away. But I mean, their fight was a different fight, I think, and they had to kind of show that a quality building could be built.
That's true.
And I think they have opened up an immense kind of playing ground for us. Without them, we wouldn't be able to play on whatever robotics and concrete. We would still be trying to convince the müteahhit to build something that was halfway decent. Now we can show, hey, but you know, if you want a good building, take a look at what Emre Bey has done. And if you want that, it costs so much, you know, in construction budget, not even design budget. So, I mean, they had another fight to give, and I think that's super important to appreciate that fact. And we now have the luxury and the kind of, let's say, playroom to do something a bit more research oriented.
Time, of course.
Time.
Budget.
Budget, yeah. Budget is lean budget. We spread it all out.
At least you don't need a budget for other expenses, let me say.
Oh, so being small
running a bigger office, yeah.
So we can be small and nimble, right, and form
collaborations. How many people are working in your office?
So as of today, I think we are 7 full-time, including ourselves. So we can discuss how productive we are. We're running around too much. But it enables us to still form collaborations based on projects. And then maybe that's in these times, maybe a more flexible model where you don't have to run a big office, but based on the individual project, we form collaborations. Right? So we are part of an enormous EU project, and at the same time we are part of a small housing project in Acıbadem.
And I think because of the type of work we do, just adding on to what Gregers is saying, we are collaborating with graphic designers, with curators, with artists. So it's also keeps it. I mean, we wouldn't be able to afford to have an artist in our team, but it's so much more fun and to be on equal levels and to collaborate. It just kind of becomes more productive and effective. So,
coming back to the issue that the older generation created a ground, do you believe that such a ground really exists, or is it a kind of a privileged, very rare examples popping up in different parts of the city, but it's not a general ground? When you look at the whole image of the city and all the production,
I think in terms
can
of
you follow that quality as a trickled issue, which has a wide range existence? I
think in the industry it does. Like, I think the contractors and then the builders, and they know what is quality now because they know that. I mean, we can discuss the design, but Zorlu Center or Sapphire or whatever have been built. So if you're in the industry, I think there's some now a target or a kind of. but normal people, I don't know. This is difficult because then you need to that level of communication. Architects never, I think, have the talent to really communicate, and this is also self-criticism. Somehow we, it's no matter what we do, I think we end up being too highbrow in the conversation. So it's that you don't have the design culture that Denmark. When you talk to the person on the street, they will be able to tell you their architects and who designed this glass and who designed that chair and who is responsible for that lampshade. I mean, we don't have that.
More critical about what not to do rather than what to do. Sometimes that's very important. So how do you see the quality of production, both in terms of design and the constructional basis in Turkey?
No.
Actually, you mentioned, for example, Zorlu Center, because we are with many guests. This example came to the conversation inevitably because it's unavoidable. It's very popular, and lots of people are talking about it. It becomes a myth. So you have given the same example, but maybe it's good to talk about, because if you watch different series, you'll be aware who thinks what about the same issue. So do you underline it as a kind of a quality production, a target for yourself, for example?
Now you.
It's a
Okay, since I started the story.
It's a tricky question.
I think I appreciate the amount of things that were tried in that project, and I appreciate the failures as well.
What are the failures, for example?
I mean, I haven't been able to go see the building in person, though I see it every day because we most of the time also drive across the bridge, so we've watched it kind of being built. And I think that's, for me, one of the failures is that a building that I see so often, I haven't been able to go to, is a failure, even though it has a kind of metro entrance. That it had this idea of, it also has a lot to do.
Problem with the city,
yes,
you mean,
yeah. So
it's not part of the city.
Yes, I don't know where the entrance
island.
is. Yeah, I don't know where the entrance is. I try to imagine which street would go there, and I'm horribly handicapped in orientation, and I can't figure out. So for me that's a failure, but I also know it tried to do it. So I appreciate that, and at that scale I know it's not easy to do it. And in terms of all the stylistic issues, I think we all have what we want to try, and it's okay to try and do things. So I wouldn't almost feel the need to criticize that, because it's.
And you think Istanbul is open such scale experiments?
But that obviously is not the designer's problem.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so. I mean, in that sense, we were talking today about a project in Toronto, which has 22 FAR, built by Frank Gehry, or to be built by Frank Gehry. And that the typical FAR in New York is 13. And here in Istanbul, we're at 6, 7, 8. So, not to say we should go higher and denser, but maybe our problems are not as dramatic as we think they are, maybe. I mean, definitely we have urban design challenges, but I think maybe those challenges are why the density feels wrong. Maybe the density itself is not the main issue, but this is all kind of speculation. I don't really know.
Where were you? You were trying to say something else.
Yeah, I think Selva was mentioning that the Zorlu Center experimenting and testing things out, So one of the things that's only recently becoming possible for let's say a younger generation is to find venues to experiment, which I think is critical to let's say develop a critical understanding what today's architecture is. I'm here I have in mind, for instance, the YAP program that Istanbul Modern is doing, like where you actually enable young designers to build without the pressure of that it has to have a return. So I think this is what, let's say, other places has been offering for some time, that you give a younger generation less pressure in terms of proving what is relevant for today's design culture, let's say. So, of course, Emre has the luxury, or let's say the privilege. It's a privilege to now to experiment because he has these big commissions, and it gives not only, let's say, inspiration from the construction sector, but of course also to the young generation of designers or architects.
Which buildings do you like in Istanbul in terms of contemporary architecture? Recent examples.
Yeah, okay, so
you
we will be...
the list, huh?
No, the list is sort
that
of...
means you don't have a list, or...
No, it's very...
hesitating, huh?
Usual suspects in a way. We like Meydan, the Ümraniye. Yeah, it's kind of a... this is where we usually send our visitors. From contemporary, it's... İMÇ is not really contemporary, of course, but that's also one of the favorites.
In Zeyrek, you mean?
Yeah. Vakko, obviously, because we've also been a little bit involved. Salt is, of course, a good example, but I mean, these are all usual suspects. Yeah. We did go to Varyap, Meridian, and Icon buildings with some groups as well. You know, they have... This is our normal tourist list for contemporary architecture in Istanbul, but
whether they're, I mean, I think we look at them to maybe not as our favorites, but as indicators of where the city is going. I think
we usually, when we have guests who ask where should we go, we kind of say you should go check these out. But of course, they should also go see Kağıthane, because it's that's also a very interesting urban phenomenon. So, yeah.
Tekfen buildings, you mean?
No, the neighborhood, or the...
Behind, basically.
Or all of Ataşehir is interesting phenomena to take a look at. But
I mean, it also includes all these mass housing, whatever comes with Toki and reproduction.
Yes, the scale is impressive. If you're a normal European, you don't expect that Istanbul has so much growth hidden away behind the hills. You go on Çamlıca, look back, not at the Bosphorus, but behind you.
It's irreversible.
Yes.
So doesn't it panic you? I mean,
I don't know if it's irreversible, because Toki says it's a temporary solution, right? They're building a mass housing, and they think it's have a lifespan of 10 years. They see it as a temporary solution, right?
Really, I never heard that.
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah.
For the Toki.
Which is insane, right? If you bring a bunch of
thinking.
Europeans down, right? I don't know what they're gonna do with the buildings after 10 years, obviously, but like the notion that you have to build something that fast is, let's say, mind-blowing.
I mean, so I guess it is a city that has this habit of rebuilding every 20 years. It's a strange habit.
So, if you compare with your experience, how long have you stayed? Have you worked in the Netherlands?
1.5 years in Netherlands and 2.5 years in the New York office for OMA. So 4 in total.
The same. The same. Okay. So you have enough experience to compare what's happening in the international system and what's happening in Turkey. How do you compare it?
There is, I think, a couple pieces. Like, from the point of view of a small office, we think actually Istanbul is not a bad place, because if we were to stay in New York, it would be very difficult for us to get our first commission. because here you have kind of human-to-human relationships. This is kind of
friends, families.
yeah, and everyone is self-made, so they expect you to also succeed if you work, right? So that's whereas in New York you would never be able to convince anyone without a portfolio of 20 buildings that you can build.
And it will be a very competitive
Yes.
market as well.
So, I mean, but of course, if we were in Denmark as a small office, we would probably have been invited to some public competitions, and it would be probably possible for us to get a lot of support and so forth. But we didn't choose to do that. That's another thing. But in terms of the general kind of city and how cities change and so forth, I guess there's a lot of similarities across the world. In some ways.
But you don't observe in this scale and as much rapid as we witness in Istanbul a transformation in any other city. Yeah, it's a huge construction activity going, and there is a transformation. Today I was talking with a friend of mine who is in Istanbul, and she was saying that, I mean, every morning we are waking up with a new silhouette. I was just saying it to also Ihsan, and I'm afraid not to know what I'm going to see tomorrow morning as Istanbul silhouette. That's the reality. I think it's a little bit exaggerated, but because that transformation thing is becoming more and more accelerated each day, and you are taking part of it. I think you are trying to understand, but your commission or your family house is a single piece, as far as I understand. That is in the Anatolian part, it is more eclectic, parcel-based transformation is happening. But in some parts of Istanbul, there is a enormous scale renewal operations that open to change the identity of the city at once and forever.
Yeah, I mean, we won't disagree. You're obviously right, but I think it is also, you have to look at what is the normality, right? I think we have ended up in a lot of discussions where we don't look at Istanbul from a European point of view, but Istanbul in connection with Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Beijing, all the other mega cities. And there, when you look at Istanbul in that collection of cities, Istanbul is rather, modest. Things are not changing that fast.
That's true.
So it very much depends on from where you are looking at Istanbul. But you're definitely right from a, let's say, Western or particularly European point of view. Istanbul is going crazy. But looking at Sao Paulo and Istanbul is more or less under control.
But there is also an introverted transformation in Istanbul. It's not only a progress and linear development towards the outskirts of the city, but the center and the historic center and even the, let's say, very significant areas are rapidly changing, especially Üsküdar, for example, is an example of that. I don't know, I mean, we may not be happy, of course, the existing fabric tissue and the building quality on the otherwise, but the other impact of that transformation is not only physical. The ownership patterns change, as far as I understand. What happened in Sulukule, for example, I think at these hours or sometime they will be discussing in one of the TV channels this Sulukule issue, and whatever the physical output product is, independent from that, there is a social interruption and a kind of a inevitable conflict that suddenly pops up, appears. Sure. So it's maybe that is one thing that makes more dramatic in terms of Islam. I don't know, of course, what happens in Beijing, because that's more, as far as I know, a kind of a renewal process, development process, more engineering-minded operation, whereas here we are changing the identity of the city.
We have a a new show at Studio X now.
I was
yeah,
also coming to
yeah.
Studio X.
Yes.
Before, can you briefly explain what Studio X is?
Studio X is actually a space initiated by Columbia University in Istanbul. They have done similarly in sort of big cities around the world. There's 6 of them. So Beijing,
Istanbul is one of them.
Istanbul, one of them. So Rio, Mumbai, Tokyo. So this is kind of the pool of cities, and Istanbul was the recent addition. It's opened in November, and the mandate is to think about cities, their future, kind of help develop a local conversation around this issue, and so on. So that's how we started. And right now we have an exhibition actually just kind of touches on what we have been talking about, called Cemetery of Architects.
Yeah, I've seen some of the images
yes,
of it. Yeah.
It was a collaboration. It was an artist work. We had been collecting these nameplates on buildings.
Are they real nameplates?
Yes, real nameplates.
I asked myself whether they are real or not.
I think he has archived about 200 over 10 years, and 60 of them have been replicated in the space. And it touches on how and when we started to talk about the city as a changing city, and what was the issues of identity kind of earlier than today. And it's I think this is for me the problem kind of somewhat lies in that definition that we have to change the city, that we're in transition, that every time it's a very restless culture. I don't know when we're going to find peace. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But so it's all of these erasures past kind of keeps waves and waves of erasures, and now you see there's a room full of 60 architects lived. Maybe some of them, their children are still alive. We have no clue. I'm an architect. I was partially educated here. I don't know maybe 3 names out of there, and the rest of them I don't know. So yeah, this is a big issue in this city, this issue of memory, and but partly it ties into a lot of other things that we are recently learning how to talk about. I don't see it as a this moment's problem. I see it as a long kind of this century's problem that we chose to forget. As an ideology, we choose to forget. That
population pressure it makes it inevitable that cities overloaded, and then
But also it emptied. Yeah. So one argument of that exhibition is that actually the city was shaped by the people who had to leave, as much as the people who came. So you see kind of people nameplates from 6 or 7 different languages. You see Greek, Armenian, obviously. Then you see Italians. You see French, German, in old Ottoman Turkish, and you see kind of these architects who felt so proud of themselves and their buildings as to put their names on them, who were making a statement that we don't have any access to anymore, what their world was like. There's not any biographies, it's a bigger, deeper issue.
But the project doesn't involve into digging back to all these heritage and trying to let's say find out what it had been, something like that, or it's just a problem statement?
It's a problem statement and archive, because now all of these nameplates are actually archived digitally. So at least we know what kind of fonts they used. Even that sort of very mundane detail, I think, is very important, because you see kind of people who chose to write their name in a very Art Nouveau style, or they wrote it in a very neoclassical style. Whatever was sort of their choice of expressing themselves in architecture, you see it. But there is also very limited information, and to be explored further within that archive. It doesn't.
It's a very, very difficult research field.
Yeah.
Some of the buildings are not there anymore. Right? So Let's see what the next question is.
What? So, how are you planning to progress in terms of the Superpool and the office? I mean, what are your plans? I know you are very comfortable with not building.
We do plan to build.
Huh?
Yeah.
You want to build?
Yeah, no, it's a good moment to ask, you know, I mean, because within our office or within Superpool, we had initiated lecture series whenever people, friends or friends of friends came through Istanbul. We had these what we call character talks. So we asked people to talk about what they were doing. And now with this Studio X, we have let's say a platform where we can take some of that community service that we were doing at Superpool and make it actually a public service, let's say. So it takes some pressure of the things that we were trying to do at Superpool, and hopefully it will give us more, let's say, yeah, we will be able to focus more on actually design. So where we let's say in the first 5 years of our office was trying to understand Istanbul and the context, I think for the next 5 years we have an ambition of starting building at least.
Of course, you don't start building the day you decide you want to start building. So, but I think what Gregers is saying is quite correct. That we now, because there's Studio X in our lives, then a lot of the research that we just wanted to do can happen through Studio X, and hopefully Superpool can become a little bit more either material research, design research, less of these social things, but at the same time we are just interested in them, so it's also difficult to hold back. Like with Studio X, we have started a prison study, prison design, what is being built, what is there.
Is it experimental again?
We're just documenting now and looking at what kind of types are being built. There's just really strange tendencies even in that sector.
Is it limited with Turkish examples?
At the moment, yeah. I mean, that's a whole another story, but like Studio X is taking on these kind of research projects. So hopefully at Superpool we can do a little bit more continuation of Taylor-Crete-like stuff. And we are very interested in digital tools for the city, which was what we did for Audi Urban Future Award. This line of work is also quite interesting for us. Obviously those are not building projects either, but
there are also exhibitions.
There are exhibitions, yeah. And we have a little museum in Hadımköy that we're working on for Hadımköy Müzesi. We will be doing the biennial, so that's also going to be quite an important task for us. We're excited about that. We have a little exhibition at MoMA. So there's these kind of research projects also have their spatial components, but they, yeah.
Once you become a classical office, it won't be able to sustain maybe in this way. Huh? You will miss these days, unfortunately.
Yeah. So the later the better.
Yeah, I think so. Is there anything you want to add or underline specifically that I missed or I didn't get into?
No, just really thank you very much. It's quite an honor for us to be included in your series. It's just we're
huh?
Yeah,
space
also
is fantastic as well, yes.
Acoustics is also really nice. And
I don't know. We will see. I mean, they know it better, of course, the results. But really, thank you for coming and joining this series. I hope it will continue with younger generation. Let me say.
Yes. We're stuck in the middle.
Yeah, you are the starting point in this sense.
But we're the middle generation now.
Yeah. Thanks for being us.
Thank you so much.